The alien bazaar was a cacophony of sound and color. Traders barked their offers, and bizarre wares glinted under artificial lights. Max Carter weaved through the crowds, his boots clanking against the metallic floor. He was on a mission to find rare artifacts for his trading business. But as he walked, something unusual caught his eye, a cage at the center of a crowd. Inside the cage stood a tall, muscular woman with emerald green skin and piercing golden eyes. Her thick silver hair was tied back, revealing sharp features and an aura of defiance. Chains bound her wrists, but her posture remained strong. She looked at her captors with disgust, refusing to show weakness. The auctioneer, a slimy reptilian alien, noticed Max's interest. "Ah, human. You like what you see. She's a Xanthari warrior, the last of her kind here. A true prize for any collection." Max frowned. "A collection? She's a person, not an artifact." The auctioneer laughed, a sound like nails scraping metal. "Xanthari don't think like you and me. They're warriors, strong, ruthless, and honor-bound. She's been cast out by her own kind. Useless to them, but perhaps you could use her strength." Max hesitated. He wasn't here to buy slaves, but something about the warrior's eyes stopped him from walking away. There was a fire in them, a determination that refused to be extinguished. "How much?" Max asked before he could stop himself. "Ah, you're a smart one. For you, a mere 50 credits, a bargain for a creature like her." Max sighed, reaching for his wallet. He couldn't leave her there, even if this wasn't part of his plan. He handed over the credits, and the auctioneer grinned. The cage opened, and the chains around the warrior's wrists were unlocked. She stepped out, her movements graceful but deadly. Her eyes bore into Max, assessing him. "Why did you buy me, human?" she asked, her voice low and steady. "To free you," Max replied simply. She raised an eyebrow, skepticism evident. "No one buys a Xanthari to free them. What do you really want?" "Nothing," Max said, shrugging. "I couldn't leave you in that cage. Come with me, and once we're off this planet, you're free to go." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. But if this is a trick, you won't live to regret it." Max chuckled nervously. "Noted." As they walked toward his ship, the alien crowd whispered behind them. A human with a Xanthari. It was unheard of. Max led her aboard his modest freighter, offering her a seat. She refused, standing tall in the corner, watching his every move. "What's your name?" Max asked. "Celia," she replied. "Well, Celia, welcome aboard. Let's get out of this place." As the ship lifted off, Max couldn't shake the feeling that his impulsive decision would lead to something far greater than he imagined. The freighter's engines hummed as it soared through space, leaving the bustling alien bazaar far behind. Max sat in the cockpit, monitoring the ship's controls, but his thoughts kept drifting to Celia, the Xanthari warrior he had just freed. She stood behind him, arms crossed, her golden eyes scanning every detail of the ship as if analyzing potential threats. "Not much of a ship," she finally said, breaking the silence. Max glanced over his shoulder with a smirk. "It gets the job done. Besides, I'm a trader, not a warrior." "Clearly," she replied, her tone sharp but not unkind. Max decided to press further. "So, Celia, what's your story? Why were you in that cage?" Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. But then she sighed and leaned against the wall. "I was betrayed," she said. "Xanthari society is built on strength and loyalty. We fight for our clans, for honor. But my clan, they accused me of cowardice during a battle I didn't start. They exiled me." Max frowned. "Cowardice? You don't strike me as the cowardly type." "I'm not," she said firmly. "But the truth doesn't matter when the elders make their decision. Exile is worse than death for a Xanthari. To be stripped of your honor, your purpose, it's a fate I wouldn't wish on anyone." Max nodded slowly, sensing the pain behind her words. "And the slavers. They found me wandering, weakened from lack of food and water. I fought, but even a xanthary has limits. Her fists clenched. I swore I'd never be caged again. Well, you're not anymore, Max said. And you're free to go whenever you like. Celia tilted her head, studying him. You're an odd human, Max. Most would have left me there or tried to use me for their own gain. He chuckled. Guess I'm not most humans. For the first time, a small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. It was brief, but Max caught it. The ship's autopilot beeped, signaling that they had entered a safe cruising zone. Max stretched and turned to face her fully. Look, I don't know what your plans are, but if you want to stick around for a while, I could use some help. Trading isn't exactly a peaceful job out here. Celia raised an eyebrow. You're asking a xanthary warrior to be your bodyguard. Why not? You'd be great at it, he said with a grin. She considered his offer for a moment. I'll stay for now. But not because I owe you anything. I'll stay because I'm curious about you, Max Carter. You're different from the humans I've encountered before. Fair enough, he said, extending a hand. She didn't shake it, but nodded instead, her expression softening slightly. As the stars stretched endlessly before them, Max couldn't help but feel that this was the start of an unlikely partnership, one that might change both their lives forever. Days passed as the ship traveled through the empty expanse of space. Max spent most of his time trading, navigating between planets and picking up rare goods, while Celia kept to herself, often training with her weapons or meditating in the small quarters she had claimed as her own. She was quiet, but Max noticed her watching him sometimes, her intense gaze as if she was analyzing every move he made. Max couldn't deny that the silence between them was starting to feel strange. He wasn't used to being around someone so reserved, especially not after the chaotic and noisy world he had grown used to. But there was something about Celia, something that made him want to break through her walls. One evening, as the ship drifted through a peaceful sector of space, Max found himself leaning against the railing in the cockpit, staring out at the stars. The distant glow of planets and nebulae filled the darkness, a quiet reminder of how small they all were in this vast universe. Celia stepped into the cockpit quietly, her movements like a shadow. "You've been quiet," she remarked, her voice low. Max didn't look at her at first. "Just thinking," he replied, his eyes focused on the stars. "About the future. Humans spend a lot of time thinking about the future. Xanthari prefer to focus on the present, on what they can control." Her voice was neutral, but Max could hear a hint of something deeper in her tone. "I can see that," Max said, finally turning to face her. "You're a warrior, after all, and warriors live in the moment." Celia nodded, her eyes steady. "We do what we must to survive. But survival is not enough. It's about honor. It's about fighting for something more than just living." Max raised an eyebrow. "You think fighting is the answer to everything?" She hesitated. "Not fighting, no, but the strength to protect. That's what I believe in." Max studied her for a moment. There was a deep sadness in her eyes, something that spoke of loss, of battles fought and won and lost. She had fought for her honor, and now she was floating through space, a warrior without a purpose. "You know," Max said after a moment, "you've got more than just strength. There's more to you than the warrior." Celia's expression didn't change. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're not just some machine of war. You've got a mind, a heart even." He paused, unsure if he was crossing a line. "I think that's why you're still alive. Not because you're strong, but because you're more than that." Her eyes softened slightly, though she didn't say anything at first. She simply turned away and walked to the small window, her gaze lost in the stars. Max didn't press her for more. He had a feeling that it wasn't yet time to dig deeper into her past. The silence lingered between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. For the first time, Max felt a quiet understanding settling between them. Perhaps they didn't need words to connect. Maybe, just maybe, the silence spoke louder than any conversation could. And in that silence, a bond was beginning to form, one that neither of them could have anticipated. The days stretched on, and Max found himself growing accustomed to the steady hum of the ship and the quiet companionship with Celia. She remained a mystery, her past hidden behind walls of discipline and strength. But Max noticed the small changes, the way she would occasionally smile, almost imperceptibly, when they shared a meal or when she taught him the basics of her warrior culture. Max had never been the type to give up easily, and he was determined to understand Celia better. He'd learned a few words in her language, and he practiced them when he could. It wasn't much, but Celia had started to notice. One evening, after a long day of trading, Max returned to the cockpit to find Celia standing by the window, gazing out at the vastness of space. The glow from distant stars reflected in her eyes, but her face was unreadable. He stood there quietly for a moment, just watching her. He had never been good at reading people, but he could sense something shifting in the air between them. "You've been quiet again," Max said, his voice breaking the silence. Celia didn't look at him immediately, but after a beat, she spoke softly. "I was remembering the days when I wasn't alone." Max's heart gave a small lurch. He hadn't realized how alone Celia must feel, traveling the galaxy with only her memories and her past for company. The weight of her silence suddenly felt heavier. "What happened to your people?" Max asked, not wanting to push too hard but needing to understand. Celia turned to him, her eyes sharp. "My people, they were destroyed. We fought, but the enemy was too strong. We were scattered, each of us alone, wandering in the endless space." Max didn't know what to say. He had heard of wars between alien races, of civilizations falling and planets being wiped out, but hearing it from Celia, seeing the pain in her eyes, made it real in a way he had never experienced. "You don't have to be alone anymore," Max said, surprising even himself. Celia didn't respond at first. Instead, she moved toward him slowly, the silence stretching between them once again. When she reached him, she stood only a few inches away, looking up at him with her intense, dark eyes. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you say that?" Max thought about it for a moment, unsure of what to say. The words were there, but they felt inadequate. "Because we're both out here, in the same place. Alone, yes, but not completely alone. And maybe that's enough." Her gaze softened, and for the first time, Max saw a flicker of something beyond the warrior she portrayed herself to be. There was vulnerability in her, hidden deep within the layers of strength and silence she had built. Celia reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. "You're a strange human, Max." He couldn't help but smile. "Maybe. But I'm the only one you've got right now." For a moment, they just stood there, silent but no longer distant. The bond between them wasn't spoken, but it was there, woven into every small action, every quiet exchange. Trust, unspoken and powerful, was beginning to grow. And as the stars continued to stretch endlessly before them, neither of them felt so alone anymore. Max woke up to the soft sound of footsteps outside his quarters. He had grown used to the quiet of the ship, but today something felt different. Celia had been more distant the past few days, lost in her own thoughts, often retreating to her personal space and giving Max room to breathe. He knew that the bond they had started to form wasn't the same for her as it was for him, but he also knew it meant something. He had seen it in the subtle way she acted around him, the way she would always make sure he had enough food or a place to sleep. He stretched and rubbed his eyes, stepping out of bed. He found Celia in the control room, looking over the star maps that dotted the holographic screen. Her brow was furrowed, her gaze intense as she studied the unknown territories ahead. "Anything interesting?" Max asked as he leaned against the doorway. She glanced at him briefly before returning to her task. "Just the usual. We're entering an uncharted sector. No signs of life or settlements here. Just empty space." Max nodded but took a step inside. "Sounds lonely." Celia's fingers hovered over the controls, pausing for a moment. It is, but I'd grown used to it. The silence between them grew thicker as Celia's expression remained unreadable. Max didn't want to push her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was bothering her. He approached the table, studying the maps she was looking at. "You know," Max began, trying to keep the mood light, "when I signed up for this intergalactic adventure, I didn't exactly think I'd end up in the middle of nowhere with a warrior Amazon as my travel buddy." Celia didn't smile, but she did look up at him, her dark eyes softening for a brief moment. "You wanted excitement, didn't you, human?" Max chuckled. "Definitely more excitement than I got back home. But I wasn't exactly looking for a cosmic isolation trip either." Celia's lips twitched as if she were trying to suppress a smile. "You're strange, Max." He grinned. "You've said that before." Celia sighed, turning away from the map. "I'm not sure where we're headed anymore," she admitted. "I've never been this far from everything I knew. My people are gone. I'm the last of my kind, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." Max's heart twisted at her words. He had always sensed there was a deep pain hidden beneath her tough exterior. But hearing her speak it so openly was something he hadn't expected. She had been alone for so long, battling not only enemies but also her own loneliness. "You're not alone now, Celia," Max said quietly, his voice gentle. "Not with me. You're not alone." Her gaze flickered to him, the hardness in her eyes softening. For a moment, there was a crack in the armor she had built for herself. Celia didn't respond right away, but she stepped toward him, her expression thoughtful. "I never asked for your help, Max. You didn't owe me anything, and yet you've stayed. Why?" Max shrugged, trying to appear casual, though his heart raced. I guess I don't really want to be alone either. And you're not like anyone I've ever met. I don't know what we'll find out here, but I'm willing to find out with you." Celia seemed to search his eyes for any sign of insincerity, but all she found was truth. She nodded slowly, the faintest flicker of something close to gratitude passing over her face. "I don't know what this is, Max," she said quietly, "but I'll protect you. I promise." Max smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "And I'll have your back, Celia. Always." They stood there for a moment longer, the bond between them solidifying. No promises, no grand gestures, just two souls finding their way through the dark void of space together. And for the first time in a long while, both of them felt a little less alone. Days passed in the quiet hum of the ship, but for Max and Celia, time seemed to move differently now. They had settled into a routine, their bond growing stronger as they shared the small spaces of the ship. Max had learned a lot about Celia's past, how she had been born into a warrior tribe, raised to fight, and had survived countless battles across different worlds. But despite all her strength, she had also experienced loss. She was more than just a warrior. She was someone who had fought to survive, and had never truly known what it meant to have someone by her side until now. Max couldn't deny how much he admired her. She was tough, fierce, and resourceful. Yet there was something vulnerable about her too. In her quiet moments, she would look out into the stars, her eyes lost in thought, as if searching for something she couldn't quite name. It was in those moments that Max found himself drawn to her even more, his own feelings for her deepening in a way he hadn't expected. One morning, as the ship passed through a dense asteroid field, Max was at the controls, his hand steady on the controls. He glanced over at Celia, who was checking the ship's systems, her sharp eyes scanning for any signs of damage. "You think we'll ever find something more?" Max asked suddenly, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Something beyond all this, all the fighting, the running." Celia paused, her fingers lingering over the console. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "More," she echoed. "Like what?" Max leaned back in his seat, his eyes drifting toward the stars outside. "I don't know. Maybe a place to call home. A place where we don't have to keep running. Where we can just be ourselves." For a moment, Celia didn't speak. She just stared at him, as though trying to understand what he meant. It wasn't like her to show vulnerability, but something in his voice made her want to listen. She had never thought about a home in that way before. She had always been taught that home was just another battlefield, another place to fight and survive. But Max's words stirred something deep inside her, something she hadn't realized was there until now. "We've been through a lot, Max," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I don't know what kind of future we'll find, but if there is a place where we don't have to fight anymore, maybe we can find it together." Max smiled, feeling the warmth spread through him. There was a bond between them now, one that no amount of space or danger could break. He knew they were still far from reaching their destination, still lost in the vastness of the universe, but he no longer felt afraid. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he wouldn't have to face it alone. The ship's sensors beeped suddenly, pulling them both out of their thoughts. Celia quickly moved to check the readings. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the data. "We've entered a strange sector of space," she muttered. "Uncharted. No signals. It's like a dead zone." Max frowned, feeling a chill run down his spine. "A dead zone. That doesn't sound good." Celia nodded, her face serious. "It's not. There's something about this place. I don't like it." Max stood up, moving toward her. "What do you mean? Should we turn back?" Celia shook her head, her grip tightening on the controls. "Turning back isn't an option now. We're already too deep in. We need to figure out what's going on here." Max glanced at the screen. The empty space stretched out before them, seemingly endless and full of nothing. A sense of unease settled over him. They were about to step into the unknown, and for the first time in their journey, Max wondered if they were truly ready for whatever they might find. But he wasn't afraid, not anymore. Not with Celia by his side. Whatever was waiting for them, they would face it together. The ship drifted deeper into the dead zone, the silence around them growing more intense. Max could feel the weight of the unknown pressing in on them, the emptiness stretching out like an endless void. The sensors were picking up strange readings, but they couldn't make sense of them. Celia's eyes flicked across the data on the console, her mind racing. She had never encountered anything like this before. "There's something off about this place," she muttered, tapping the console impatiently. "It doesn't make sense. We should be picking up more readings. There's nothing here. No stars, no planets, no energy signals." Max stood beside her, watching her work. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the furrow in her brow. Celia was usually so confident, but even she couldn't deny the eerie feeling that filled the ship. "Maybe we should turn around. This doesn't feel safe." "I can't," she said, shaking her head. "If we turn back now, we'll never know what's out here. We've come too far. Besides, I've seen worse. We'll make it." Max could see the determination in her eyes, and it gave him a sense of reassurance. She was right. They had come this far. Whatever lay ahead, they had faced danger before and survived. They could do it again. Suddenly, the ship lurched, and Max grabbed onto the nearest console for balance. The alarm went off, blaring through the silence of the cockpit. Celia's hands flew over the controls, her mind racing to stabilize the ship. "What was that?" Max asked, his voice rising in alarm. Celia's eyes narrowed. "We've hit something. Something invisible. The sensors didn't detect it in time. Hold on." The ship's hull shuddered, and Max could hear the low groan of metal being stressed. They were caught in something powerful and unseen. Max felt his heart race as the ship was pulled in further. "We're being pulled toward the center of the dead zone," Celia said, her voice tight with urgency. "I can't break free." Max's pulse quickened. "What's pulling us? What is this place?" Celia didn't answer. She was focused, her fingers flying across the controls as she fought to regain control of the ship. The gravity seemed to shift around them, making it harder for them to stay steady. Max could feel his stomach churn as the ship was dragged deeper, pulled by an invisible force that seemed to grow stronger by the second. He looked out the viewport, his breath catching as he saw something in the distance, a massive, dark shape slowly emerging from the void. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. It looked like a giant structure, made of a material that seemed to absorb all light. It wasn't a ship, at least not one like any he had ever encountered. It was ancient, alien, and terrifying. Celia's eyes widened as she spotted it too. This is not good. We've stumbled into something ancient, something powerful. Max gripped the seat tightly, fear gnawing at him. What do we do? Celia didn't answer at first. She was concentrating on keeping the ship steady, fighting against the pull that was dragging them toward the dark structure. Finally, she spoke. We can't go back. We have no choice but to enter it. It's the only way to find out what's really going on here. Max's heart pounded in his chest, but he nodded. He trusted her. They had faced every challenge together, and they would face this one too. There was no turning back now. As they approached the massive structure, the air seemed to crackle with energy. Max felt a cold shiver run down his spine. This was no ordinary place. Whatever lay ahead, they were about to discover something that could change everything. But Max didn't know if it would be a blessing or a curse. Together, they would find out. The ship groaned as it was pulled closer to the dark structure. Max gripped the edge of his seat, his eyes fixed on the viewport, watching as the massive shape loomed closer with every passing second. The ship's controls had become less responsive, as if some unseen force had begun to take over the vessel's systems. Celia, her face pale and tense, worked frantically at the console, her fingers flying over the buttons, but it was clear she was struggling to maintain control. Max could see the strain in her eyes. Celia, we need to stop. We can't just crash into that thing. I'm trying. Celia hissed, sweat beginning to bead on her forehead. Whatever this is, it's more powerful than anything we've ever encountered. It's affecting everything. Our systems, our engines, even gravity. Max's heart raced. He wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that they were about to crash into an unknown alien structure, or the creeping sense of dread that filled the air. Everything about this place screamed ancient and dangerous. The walls of the structure seemed to absorb light, casting a shadow that seemed to stretch beyond the ship's view. It was as if it were alive, waiting for them. The ship lurched again, and for a moment, everything went silent. Max's stomach dropped. Then the voice came. Welcome, travelers. The voice was deep and echoing, and it filled the cockpit. It wasn't coming from the ship's systems. No, this voice seemed to come from everywhere, resonating in Max's mind. It was alien, but somehow familiar. Max froze, his eyes wide. Did you hear that? Celia nodded grimly, her eyes scanning the control panel. I'm not the one doing this. Something's taking over the ship. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That voice, it's coming from the structure. The ship was now just meters away from the structure. The walls of the dark monument began to shimmer, revealing faint glowing lines that pulsed like veins. The air around them grew colder, and Max's breath came out in misty clouds. Do not resist, the voice continued. You are here because you are needed. Max turned to Celia, his face pale. Needed for what? What is this place? Before Celia could respond, the ship suddenly jolted again, this time with a force that threw them both forward. The metal beneath them vibrated wildly, and the lights in the cockpit flickered. Then everything went dark. Max blinked as his eyes adjusted. He was no longer in the cockpit. He and Celia now stood in a vast, dark chamber. The air was thick, heavy with an energy that seemed to press down on them. The walls of the chamber stretched upward into an endless void. At the center of the room, a massive glowing crystal floated, pulsating with power. The voice echoed again, now more intense. You are here to awaken what has long been dormant. You have brought the key. Max's heart pounded. The key. What does that mean? The glowing crystal responded, its light flaring brighter. You are the one who has repaired the vessel, and with it, the ancient technology that binds this place. Max turned to Celia, confused. What is this? What's happening? Celia's eyes were wide with understanding. This ship, it's not just a vessel. It's a prison. A containment unit. Max's eyes widened. Containment unit. What's inside it? Celia swallowed hard. Something that was never meant to be free. The walls began to pulse, the energy in the room growing stronger. Max felt a sudden cold chill run through his bones as the crystal's light brightened even further. And then, the ground beneath them shook. Celia's eyes met Max's, filled with both fear and resolve. We have to stop it before it's too late. Max didn't know how, but somehow, deep down, he knew this moment was only the beginning. The mystery of this ancient structure, the key they had brought, and the unknown power it held were all about to change their fate forever. And the universe would never be the same again.